Boston's task force on reparations seems poised to ask Mayor Michelle Wu to temporarily stop a program to build affordable housing across the city. $58 million in COVID relief money is set to go towards the mayor's Welcome Home Boston plan, and the city also plans to give away 150 vacant city lots to developers to build affordable homes and offer forgivable grants of up to $100,000 to would-be homeowners. But former state Senator Dianne Wilkerson argued at a recent task force meeting that the city should wait until the reparation task force finishes its research before all the relief money and all those empty lots are gone. The group's chair agreed and said he'd urge the mayor to press pause. It's worth noting the task force, which was established late last year and staffed up in February, has had a few hiccups so far already, and it is not exactly clear when they're going to wrap up their research. Saraya Wintersmith has been following this story for GBH News, and she joins me now. Saraya, excellent to see you as always. Thanks for being here. I remember the mayor announcing this plan to let people build on empty lots in her State of the City speech, and it seemed like a great big deal, maybe the biggest idea to come out of that speech. Why does the chair of the Reparations Task Force and apparently some of his colleagues, why do they think it's smart to pause that program and the other ones that we identified?
Hey, Adam, it's good to be with you, too. I think the short answer is that no one likes busy work. The task force doesn't want to perform all of its duties, hire researchers, conduct analysis, look back at some of the things the city has done, and then make recommendations based on that research, and then arrive at a point where there aren't any tangible resources to consider in order to fulfill reparations recommendations. So this idea of pausing Welcome Home, it was raised by Dianne Wilkerson. She asserted that, and many folks agreed, any researcher who sets out to examine what Boston might have done to damage Black people's wealth-building trajectories, or any ways that the city might have discriminated against Black people in a targeted way, is going to find that the city seized property from Black people. And that's something that the task force is likely going to have to address. And even though the mayor said that she wanted these 150 parcels to be built on to start contributing to the surrounding area, Wilkerson and the task force chair and members of the task force agreed that it would be a shame for them to get to the end of their work and the city not have anything to give.
When Wilkerson made that pitch, the language she used in your piece, it struck me as very blunt and powerful. Remind me what she said. It was something like, those lots are empty because Black people's homes...
bulldozed over Black people's homes and businesses.
Yeah, that phrase stands out and stuck with me. Wilkerson, some of our viewers will know, but some won't, has been making a comeback when it comes to public life after spending time in prison, after pleading guilty to taking $23,500 in bribes several years ago. Can you just offer a brief description of how she's repositioned herself as a public figure of some influence?
I think even with the guilty plea, this is a city where one of the mayors himself was incarcerated for crime and still beloved. This is a city where there was a criminal on the run who had a sibling that was in the state house at the same time that he was on the run. And so Boston is not a place that's unfamiliar with power being connected to crime. And we can see multiple examples of folks who get in trouble with the law but still maintain a portion of public trust. Mm-hmm. Dianne Wilkerson, I think most recently in Boston, was critical to the Black Boston COVID-19 task force. I think she ran for office to represent the 2nd Suffolk and ultimately didn't win, to regain her seat and ultimately didn't win. But she does work in the community, and she has rebuilt trust among a portion, particularly of Black Boston.
I remember talking to her about COVID relief measures and equity in that space during the pandemic, and she's always been an extremely skilled politician and a very effective messenger, and she was in that case for sure. So has the task force, we talked about how the chair seems on board with this idea that former State Senator Wilkerson floated of pausing these programs. The chair seems on board, and some of his colleagues seem on board. Has a formal ask to the mayor to, press pause, has that been made yet or not?
That's a really great question. And the answer here is that I'm not sure there will be a formal ask, only because as I view the task force meetings, they're not a panel that takes official votes. There have been several times where members in meetings suggest that there need to be some sort of official tally to convey the panel's feeling as a whole. And one thing that was not in my reporting, but did happen at the last meeting, is that they rejected the idea of adopting bylaws, which would also govern the way that the panel moves as a whole. And so I'm not sure there will be anything formal. It seems like, again, the task force repeatedly distances itself from sort of the more formal levers that govern how agencies conduct themselves. What I do know is that multiple members indicated it was a good idea, and that the chair told me he will carry that back to the administration.
I had no idea, by the way, that the task force did not do the formal vote thing. I think of that as just a matter of course. So I'm glad to learn that from you. What's Mayor Wu said, if anything, in response to the sentiment that surfaced at the meeting that you attended?
This is a great question, too, and one that I'm still waiting for an answer for. And so as of our conversation right now, my inquiry just for a statement about the idea of pausing hasn't received a response. Obviously, it's an initiative that the mayor highlighted at her State of the City, and it's big in that way. It is also big because it's connected to her goal to produce more housing, and in this case, it would be income-restricted housing that Welcome Home Boston creates. And given those factors, I imagine it'd be a difficult interruption for the mayor to adopt.
You talked in your piece about how there are concerns about the task force's approach in other areas. What are the concerns that some city residents have voiced?
Yeah, people are critical about the fact that the task force is still in its very beginning stages. In my reporting, I highlighted one critical voice, but I talked to multiple people who said that they received information about the panel's community meetings by happenstance, by a text message or like a screenshot. And they say it shouldn't happen that way. There should be a more targeted or concerted effort to reach out to members of the public who would be interested in this work and have something to say about it. Their meetings are also not being live streamed. The task force was formed in February. They had their first meeting in April or May. It is now July. And the sort of virtual access that we saw expand during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic is not extending to these panels meetings. That means less people can view the work and less people can follow along and respond.
That surprises me. I would have thought that with a huge job like the one the task force has, with an issue this complex, that you'd want to maximize public engagement as those discussions were occurring. So I am surprised to hear that that has not been the case. You mentioned that 2 members of the task force have stepped down since it was staffed up. Who left? Why did they leave? And are they going to be replaced?
Dr. David Harris and Dr. Carrie Greenidge were 2 of the panel's most academic minds. Dr. Harris said that he, aside from not being a Boston resident, had limited time that he could contribute to the task force. Dr. Carrie Greenidge, who I did not speak with, is a professor at Tufts, but multiple people who are around the panel's work suggested to me that her scholarship in the area of race and colonialism and diaspora make her a really great candidate to lead some of the research that needs to happen to undergird the panel's ultimate suggestions to the city. Okay,
so she may ultimately, when they do hiring for someone as a research partner, she may be the person who gets picked. Potentially.
That's right. Okay. I said in my reporting, it's also unclear whether the mayor intends to appoint 2 new members to replace those 2. So we're down to.
For me, everything that you describe in your piece, which people should go and read if they haven't already, everything you describe for me raises the question of whether the task force is ultimately going to be able to meet the deadline that has been set for them. They're supposed to finish their work by the end of June next year, right? So less than a year from now. This is speculation I'm asking you to engage in, but you are an informed observer, so it would be informed speculation. Do you think they're going to hit that deadline?
You know I'm not a fan of making predictions.
I know you're not, and I'm sorry, but I got to ask.
I believe that unexpected forces can always influence government and politics. So what I will say is that the task force is already behind on its work. According to the legislation that created this panel, researchers should have been tapped and contracted this year. They were supposed to make an assessment about the city's actions and the continued impacts of slavery, and all of that was supposed to be done by December 2023. That would have made the timeline easier for the task force to make its recommendations by June 2024 and wind down its work by December 2024. So we're already off that timeline. The task force is still putting together a request for proposals. And in the draft that we saw at this last meeting, the request would push out the research work so that it lines up pretty much with the time that the task force is supposed to dissolve in December of next year. And when it came time to review that proposal, it was members of the public who noted that the timeline discrepancy was going to mean there's no guarantee that the panel can make recommendations. I say all of this to say there are vigilant members of the public, it seems, who are watching, pointing out the lack of virtual access, pointing out the lack of outreach, pointing out the bad planning. And so it's very possible that the forces of government that make things slow will make this slow also, but we just have to wait and see.
All right, Saraya Wintersmith, great to see you. Thanks, as always.